Welcome to It's Complicated, Cancer in Your Relationship Status, a Canadian Cancer Society webcast. This webcast is generously supported by RBC, AstraZeneca, and Merck. My name is Lacey Horta. I'm a CancerConnection specialist and the moderator of CancerConnection.ca. I'm your host. Today, our guest speaker is Danielle Schroder, clinical counselor and young adult lead with Callanish Society. Today we'll be discussing the experiences and challenges people living with cancer face with their intimate relationships. You'll hear first-hand accounts from both individuals in long-term relationships and from those who are dating during and after cancer treatment.
Thank you so much for having me here today to speak about a topic that I think is really important and one that can be really difficult to have with those closest to you. So today I'm going to be speaking about the impact cancer has on your intimate relationships, and that's for those of you who are currently in a long-term relationship and also those of you who may be thinking about getting into a new relationship with someone and how to do that after cancer's entered your life. So I just want to say a little bit about myself. My name is Danielle, and I work with a nonprofit organization in Vancouver called Callanish Society, and we've been around for about 25 years and have really focused on helping people through the cancer experience really start to understand, what's been happening for them, a lot on the emotional level, and how it's also affected their relationships. And so we take people on retreats, and we also have a center in Vancouver where we offer group support and individual support to really help people explore what this experience of cancer has been like for them. I work a lot with young adults, and we have a really thriving young adult program. And so I was very fortunate. There was a young adult in our community named Alexandra Van who created a wonderful documentary a few years ago that was focused specifically on the topic of what the experience of cancer has had on young adults and their sexuality. And so I just thought so much of that documentary is superb, and I thought it would be really nice as I speak about relationships to be able to include some of the clips from her film, just so you get some firsthand conversation with people talking very openly about what it's been like on their sexuality, which is so much a part of our intimacy. So if you're interested at the end of the film to watch, or at the end of the presentation to watch Alexandra's film, there will be a link to her whole documentary, which is about 25 minutes long and is a really excellent film. Some of the quotes you'll be hearing from come from the website off of Young Adult Cancer Canada, which again has excellent first-hand stories from individuals speaking about their experience in cancer. And there's some wonderful quotes that I took on the topic of relationships that are also included in this presentation. So I'm just going to begin with a clip from the documentary just to open things up around this conversation around intimate relationships.
I was sick. I didn't feel sexy. I didn't feel beautiful. And even my family didn't even treat me like an adult anymore. They treated me like a child. So if you think about it, if you're viewed as a child, you're not sexy at all.
How could I not question my sexuality? How could I not question my worth?
There are so many nuances when you're diagnosed with a disease that it impacts. And one of the things that I would say was prevailing for me was sexuality.
I so desperately needed there to be something in my life that didn't totally revolve around cancer.
It's pretty much there in your face, right?
So as we enter into this conversation, I think what all of them are sort of speaking to is just how when cancer entered their life, everything kind of changed in themselves, in their identity. And of course, that's going to automatically affect how we are in relationship with somebody else, especially in an intimate relationship. So this is a quote from a woman named Amy who's living with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And she says, "Every relationship you have is put on the hot seat when you have cancer. Suddenly, everyone has an opinion, and somewhere in between cancer treatments, doctor's appointments, maintaining a household, a storm hits and it tests every relationship in your life." So I want to begin by talking about when this storm first hits. So talking about initial diagnosis and active treatment. And I think this is a really important time to first talk about what happens in our intimate relationships in this early stage when you first find out you have cancer, and then you get kind of thrust into this very intense active treatment phase. So I want to start there, and we'll speak about both for the experience of those of you who are listening who are living yourself with the cancer, and also for those of you who might be partners, caregivers in this process. So the shock of diagnosis, I think it's really important and helpful to realize, and sometimes we don't realize this, that the moment you're actually given the news that you have cancer, it is a traumatic experience, and it's traumatic for you, those of you who've had cancer, and also for your loved ones. And we do go into a state of shock when we're first given that news. And when we're in shock, our system goes into what's called the survival mechanism, which is often what you hear as a fight, flight, or freeze response. And this is a very instinctual, automatic response that our system does to protect us and also to help us figure out how we're going to fight off and fend ourselves off of this danger or this threat, which in this case is cancer. And what's important is to realize that each of us have a tendency when we go into this fight, flight, or freeze response to more often go either into fight, flight, or freeze. So it's very unique to each of us what one we tend to do more often. And usually we start to see that in all the different ways whenever we're feeling under threat. What is our first response? Do we fight, do we flight, or do we freeze? And when we realizing that we're in a traumatic experience really helps us understand why it can be really challenging to be in an intimate relationship, or if we are in a relationship to feel a sense of intimacy with our partner, because when we're in trauma, we're not feeling very intimate, because intimacy requires a feeling of safety, it requires a feeling of openness and a certain kind of vulnerability that allows us to let somebody else in. But when we're in trauma, we're so frightened and our system is so overwhelmed, and we're in this automatic response of needing to fight or freeze or flee, that we aren't open and we don't feel safe, and therefore it really has a ripple effect on our relationships. And it can take a really long time to trust that we are safe enough again to open up, and whether that's opening up to our own partner to truly feel intimate again, or whether that's to really open up to somebody new. So it's really useful to ask yourself, when you're in this state of trauma, to ask yourself, what am I like when I'm under threat? Do I notice that I tend to want to fight to protect myself? And a fight might look like I want to pick fights with people. I get easily irritable and kind of lash out. I raise my voice a lot. Or do I often have a tendency to freeze? And freezing might look like going numb. You might want to really withdraw. You kind of shut down. You feel like you pull away from everybody. And a sense of fleeing is, and if you're someone who might flee, it really is this idea of always wanting to keep busy. You might even notice you run away from things, run away from people. So the importance of this is to really go, okay, this is what happens for me when I feel under threat. And if you're in a relationship, it's really valuable to let your partner know that that is your tendency, so that they cannot take it personally if you are maybe lashing out more, or maybe you're shutting down a bit more. So I want to move on to thinking of, for those of you who are in a long-term relationship at the moment, it's really helpful to think about when cancer enters your relationship. It really is like a third person in the relationship. So I want to speak about this experience of cancer becoming the third person in your relationship. This is a quote from a husband speaking about how the relationship is less about us and it's more about the cancer. So that really sums up what that means to have cancer as the third person in your relationship. Essentially, cancer adds a whole new dimension to your relationship, and it takes the center stage. So really often, and I'm sure some of you know, it makes all of your plans suddenly come to a halt, and everything is about what to do around treatment, what's going to happen with cancer. And it takes tremendous emotional energy to deal with the cancer alone, that there really is no space often to put any attention into the relationship. And I think this woman, Susie, who you're going to hear speak next, speaks really well about that and the effect of this emotional energy that is taken away from your relationship and all put on the cancer.
What I noticed is that once I was diagnosed with cancer, I had no additional emotional energy to deal with what was happening with him, and so I could sense, and he did pull back, and I mean, he kind of was sort of supportive at times, but then he would commit to coming to an appointment with me and bail at the last minute. And now when I look back on that, I think, why did I not just say, you need to either stay or go, like not be in this in-between stage? But I was so overwhelmed with being diagnosed with cancer and facing treatment that I had zero extra anything to deal with our relationship stuff. So it was sort of in a holding pattern, I would say, because I couldn't do anything like break up with him or do anything major like that when I was using everything I had to just get through what I was doing. So I would say, whatever state a relationship is in, the addition of a cancer diagnosis is a huge strain, and there really isn't, at least for me, I found there wasn't any extra anything to to navigate relationship ups and downs. It becomes, or for us, it became all about, I have cancer, I'm doing treatment, we're just hanging in there. He came and supported me when he could, etc.
I think Susie really speaks beautifully about the kind of work and energy that's required for you living with cancer and just getting through those treatments, but also for supporters, for loved ones, just being there to really, again, do a lot of the caregiving and a lot of the supporting that way. That it's hard to have any space to just be in the two of you relationship. So this is a quote from the husband of someone living with cancer. He says, relationships are mostly about compromise. When you live with a significant other, everything from what you watch on TV to whose job it is to take out the garbage to I cooked dinner today so you get to do the dishes is a compromise. When said partner is diagnosed with a serious illness, the compromise changes significantly. I thought that was a really great quote. And what he's talking about is how the compromise changes is that really the dynamic of your relationship often changes tremendously. And because of this strain that it puts on your dynamic, that we were partly that, again, the energy that goes into just getting through the cancer treatments. But it's also there's a huge balance of power shift that happens for many couples. And you'll especially notice this in couples who have always really been a partnership that's about equal sharing of tasks, of roles, of jobs, and just offering that beautiful reciprocity all the time. And suddenly when cancer comes in, there's this natural shift that happens, which is, the person who's going through cancer becomes more like a patient because they're dealing with more sickness, and then the other partner becomes more of a caregiver, and it becomes this care-patient dynamic, which can be really hard for some couples to reverse, especially if it's going on for a long time. You also might notice that conversations become less about each other and more about the cancer. This is a quote from a woman saying, it's like you're on two different journeys. I think we were both scared shitless. I think this is just a great, indicator of how you're actually both going through the cancer experience together, but actually it's how you experience it is very different. And that can sometimes create some separation and connection in the relationship. So then as we think about these, as you're both on your own kind of individual experiences, but also trying to do it together, I want to first speak about, for those of you who are who are the ones living with cancer or have had cancer, what this experience is like of becoming the sick person in the relationship and how that affects your sense of intimacy, your sense of identity, and how to be together in the relationship. So we're just going to watch a video clip that speaks to that.
Males are perceived to be sort of the protector.
Women are the caretakers. They take care of everybody. Now you're somebody that has to be taken care of. Mm-hmm. And so you lose a degree of autonomy, no matter if you're male or female.
I really felt that before cancer, I was that alpha male. And during cancer, it gets stripped away from me.
There's this whole commercialization of a woman as a warrior when she goes through breast cancer and survives. But it just felt weird to me, like it was like glamorizing breast cancer. All of the self-esteem issues that I had, all of the feelings of sexuality, of trying to rebuild my identity as a woman, it just crashed.
Well, I think that, the sick person is looked at as this ugly being that's asexual, has no sexual desire, and especially the cancer patient as a sick person. There's very prominent features that a cancer patient should have.
So I think everyone who's speaking there really, overall I'm just going to summarize a little bit of what they're talking about, which is just how much change happens and what this role of becoming the sick person means. And it means a lot. And I think it comes with a lot of losses. And I think when you think of yourself as being a sick person, it means a loss of identity. You heard someone talk about the loss of seeing themselves as an alpha male, or the loss of seeing themselves as a caretaker, loss of autonomy and independence, loss of purpose, loss of confidence. Someone was speaking a lot about her self-worth. Loss of your sexual identity, that it's hard to feel like a sexual being when you feel like people look at you like a sick person. And then there's also people talk about feeling like a burden when they're sick, when they see themselves as always sick or unwell or feeling needy or weak. And it's helpful to realize that when we are carrying all these losses and these feelings, that they are directly affecting how we feel about ourselves. And when we don't feel good in ourselves, that will show up very strongly in how we can be in our intimate relationships, or when we think about meeting someone new and entering into a relationship. So for those of you who are in a relationship, I think a big challenge a lot of people talk about when they see themselves as becoming the sick person in the relationship is that they have to now become really reliant on their partner in ways that they never had to rely on them to the degree they do now. And for some people, especially if you've been a fiercely independent person all your life, to suddenly have to now rely on your partner so much more and in every way can be extremely challenging. And it can feel like a new kind of vulnerability that for some people is really uncomfortable, and they find that it causes them to almost want to pull away from their partner because the vulnerability feels too much, and they pull away because they're trying to find a way to hold on to their own sense of independence. So this is this woman, Amy, speaking again, who's living with stage 4 ovarian cancer. She says, being the person I am, I put up a defense where although I was honest with my husband, I'd also fallen into a trap of silence, holding back my feelings because of the mistaken belief that my true feelings and experience would be harmful. And a small piece of me was scared of the slight chance that maybe he couldn't or didn't want to handle it. So again, I think a lot of what Amy's speaking about is this incredible vulnerability you feel inside, and that sometimes this wanting to pull away or defend ourselves is because it feels so scary to really open up to someone else about how we're really feeling, even our partner. So another thing that I think through that quote that Amy's saying is there's this desire in us to hold back sharing fully with our partners because there's this instinct to want to protect those we love. There's this instinct in us to want to shield those we love from our sadness, from our guilt, from our fear and worry. And I think we all often do that. And the challenge of that is that it takes a lot of energy to stay strong. And it takes a lot of energy to feel like you're trying to always keep it all together for everybody. And sometimes when we're trying to protect each other, we end up actually only feeling more isolated and more lonely from each other. So I want to now speak about being in the other path, which is those of you who are caregivers, who are supporting your partners going through cancer, and what that trying to be a supportive partner, that role is like. Here's his husband speaking. He says, it's really hard as a supporter to watch a loved one go through the effects of chemo, radiation, and surgery, but it's also draining having to be there for them at all times. And there's really no way to vent any of your frustration because you know that what you are going through is nothing compared to what your partner is dealing with. So when we look at the challenges experienced by partners, I think what this husband John said is one of the most common ones I know I've heard is a lot of partners have a hard time feeling like they have a right to be struggling because they always see that what they're going through is nothing compared to what their partner with cancer is going through. And as a result, a lot of times they kind of brush off saying they need support because they want their partners to be the ones to be getting all the support. And the risk in that is that it can really lead to caregiver burnout because the reality is that being the supporter, being the caregiver, it takes tremendous work and is incredibly challenging. And to have to watch someone go through cancer is really hard. So it's really important that you do realize that actually it's very difficult for you too. I think also partners experience a tremendous feeling of helplessness and loss of control, and maybe even a feeling of inadequacy when they feel like they can't fix their partner and make things better. And some people talk about carrying a fear of hurting their partner's feelings if they do decide to bring something up that's bothering them. And I think that the fear is just they don't want to add something else to their partner when they're already dealing with, treatments for cancer and all that. But the challenge is that if you don't bring up some of what you're feeling, it just stays buried inside, and that can come out as depression, or it can also come out as resentment. So I want to now start to think about, now that we kind of, as we talk about, what's happening, and hopefully you got some insight there into what goes on in that, again, that initial diagnosis and active treatment phase. And so I want to speak about what I'm calling picking up the pieces. When we get to the stage in the cancer process where there's two ways this can look. It's either you've been through all your treatment and you've been told, okay, now just go back into your life. Hopefully you don't need any more treatment. Just go back to living your lives and moving on from cancer. And also for those of you who maybe are in a situation where you've been told, cancer isn't going to go away, but, hopefully there'll be treatments that you can keep taking that will keep it stable. So just go back into your life and just try to, live your life, your normal day-to-day life. And so I think both of those, sometimes we want to think that next stage of picking up the pieces can be really simple, but actually there's a lot that goes into that part of the process of going through cancer. So I'm just going to show a little video clip to speak of that.
You've already had to go through cancer and you've already had to deal with all this stuff, but then you have to work so hard with the aftermath too.
So I just really like what Shannon says there, because I think she's naming that, I think sometimes we hope that, getting through the treatments, which was so intense and so much work and so full on, that, once that's over, that we can just go back into our lives just as they were. And I think what she's saying is there is this aftermath. And when the shock wears off and things start to settle in a certain way, or there's more stability again, then all the feelings, all the changes start to arise. And that can for some people actually be harder, and for some relationships be the harder stage to move through. So I think the biggest thing is that each of you, whether you're the person with cancer or the supporter, are trying to cope with so many feelings and changes inside yourself that are related to what cancer has changed inside you. Caregivers might also be feeling some exhaustion. And I think what we have to be careful is that a lot of people try to create what I'm calling the illusion of normalcy again. This idea of wanting to go back to how it was before cancer, when deep down you can't. And I think when we can actually name that things aren't how they were before, that something is different, that it can begin to start to open up the possibility to understand how we can move forward in this new way. So I really want to just emphasize that you're absolutely normal if you're feeling these feelings, grief and loss. I miss the life I had before cancer. I miss the life we had before cancer. Guilt. I wasn't good enough. I don't feel I was good enough at this. I made mistakes in this way. Regret. I wish I hadn't said or done this. Fear. I'm afraid the cancer will come back. I'm afraid of death. Anger. I hate that this happened. And there might be so many more that you can attach to that, but those are some of the most common. This is a quote. A lot of these feelings fuel each other, making it more and more difficult to break out from the cycle of sadness, grief, isolation, guilt, and worry. I think on some level I thought I was sparing my husband from some of these emotions, when in reality I was really accomplishing the opposite of its intent. So again, I think she's speaking about, I think there is this desire in us to kind of hide these deep, painful feelings from our loved ones, especially our partners, thinking that we're going to protect them, that it might, that it's better not to, when really a lot of the times what we need is to just name these feelings for ourselves and for each other. This is from a supporter, a husband saying, guilt happens. When my wife first went into treatment, I had to work a full day, come home, cook dinner, clean up after dinner, give the kids a bath, read stories, clean anything else in the house, and put the child to bed. All these things take up time, and when I crawl into bed, my wife would be going stir crazy from spending the day in bed. She was dying to help, but she didn't have the energy. And she would want to chat, but I didn't have the energy after the chores. So again, I think here someone just saying, looking back, he just has to accept that guilt is part of what he's working with in the aftermath. A little bit more about grief and loss. I think grief is one of the biggest feelings that I think sometimes we have a hard time naming, but it's so prevalent when we've been through the cancer experience, because grief really is a normal part of the process you're going to go through. And grief is simply connected to any losses you can identify that have come forward in your life since cancer's come into your life. And it's usually connected to everything cancer has changed about your life. And these losses have a profound impact on your relationships, especially when you aren't able to recognize and share them openly. And it's good to know that sometimes a symptom of buried grief, when we don't let the grief out, is depression, because it's got such a heavy loss, carries so much weight, and when we don't let the weight up, it can sit in us and it can get really heavy, like depression. So for those of you who have gone through cancer, I want to just focus a little bit on you guys for a little while and just talk about, with all these feelings that I've just brought up and all the losses, I think there's also some tremendous personal changes that you might go through. And these are some of the common ones people talk about. They talk about changes in their identity, changes in sexuality and sense of intimacy, changes in their priorities, changes in their roles and responsibilities like parenting and career, changes to how they meet new people and the idea of dating, and also changes in how they see and plan for the future. So I really want to focus for a bit on how cancer impacts your identity for those of you who've gone through cancer, because I think cancer has a tremendous impact on your identity. And just starting to understand, what's changed in how I see my identity and what stayed the same. So we're just going to watch a clip about that.
I'm like this alpha male that I would consider myself, like athletic since I was born, was in pretty good shape even before cancer, never smoked, never did drugs, and all of a sudden I got diagnosed with lymphoma. So I was used to living a very, I had this work hard, play hard mentality on life in general. Now I don't so much, but I did everything to the max. So I was used to being able to do that both physically and mentally. And then when I got diagnosed, it's like all of that disappeared, in addition to my sexuality. So the confidence, the sort of independence of being able to be that alpha male, if you will, disappeared. And it disappeared overnight. Like it literally did.
So I think what Glenn's talking about here is just how his whole identity was turned upside down the moment he was diagnosed with cancer. And when you think of your identity, I think your identity, what it's encompassed is these core beliefs you carry about yourself. And many core beliefs about yourself before cancer are what you think about when you then think, how have those changed after cancer entered your life? So, for Glenn, that you just heard, he talked a lot about how he had this really strong identity of being this alpha male. And somehow cancer has really shifted that identity, and it shifted very quickly. Another common one we hear people talk a lot about is how before they had cancer, they really saw themselves as a healthy person. And now that's been completely turned upside down. So 2 common identity changes that I want to focus on just because they have such an effect on your intimate relationships is how your physical and sexual identity, your body image, your sense of sexuality and intimacy, and also your social identity. So how you sort of see yourself out in the social world, how those change going through the cancer experience. And I think the social identity is particularly important when you're on your own and you're thinking about dating and meeting new people. So I just want to start with talking about the physical and sexual identity, and this is kind of focusing around, how is your body image? How do you see yourself now after cancer, or with cancer in your life, around body image, your feelings of attractiveness? And we're gonna listen to Susie speak a little bit about this.
Just the experience of chemotherapy and losing hair and just feeling so gross in so many ways in my own body, sick and yucky, that really does, it feels like it changed how I feel about myself and feeling comfortable in my body and confident and that I'm attractive or those sorts of things. So that has been a slow progression to kind of get to a different place with that, or to find some confidence again. And then obviously being intimate with someone is a whole other level of openness and vulnerability.
So I think a lot of what Susie's talking about there is how much has changed and how she sees her physical self and also her sense of her sexual self. And some of what she speaks about and what a lot of people talk about is when they're trying to understand how that's changed, there's all these feelings that are now associated, like feelings of embarrassment and maybe even some shame around how their body's changed or that they've even had cancer happen to them. Some people carry tremendous guilt. And often people feel very isolated and alone with their feelings. I think talking about our physical identity and also especially our sexual identity, I think people really feel that's not something you can talk about openly. And so I think a lot of people, again, try to bring in this illusion of normalcy, like trying to convince themselves that everything's normal and they feel fine, when actually inside they really don't. And I think they feel that nobody wants to talk about it. And this is including people who are in a long-term relationship. And I think for those of you who are single, I think if you feel this fear, I think I've heard this many times, which people have a fear that they don't know if they'll ever feel ready to be sexual and intimate with someone new again. I think that's a very common fear. So this is someone who quoted saying, "It's easy for society to talk about the fun side of sex, but nobody ever wants to talk about the awkwardness, the dysfunction, or the problems some of us encounter when in the act of love." So I think, again, it just shows how difficult these conversations can be. This is someone else saying, I was embarrassed about how my body failed me during intercourse. I felt more guilt on top of my other guilt for the feelings I was having, and I was afraid to tell anyone about it. I didn't feel I had anyone I could tell about it because people just don't talk about this stuff. So I just want to listen again to another video clip.
There's no way I felt sexual, and there's no way I had any sexual confidence. So I would shy away from attractive people.
Sex is so physical, but it's so mental all at the same time. It's mental, it's emotional, it's physical, it's spiritual, it's all of those things.
It had a huge impact on our, sexual relationship, and just in every regard, everything from mental to physical to everything. So I think, I don't know, I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. It had a real negative impact. It was something that you had to sort of, another thing that you had to cope with in addition to everything else.
My breasts were very, that was the part that I enjoyed the most when we had sex. And now, because I don't have that sensation anymore, it's really, it kind of wrecks it for me. Like, especially if I'm trying to let my husband, enjoy that. And if I think about it too much, then I almost get frustrated.
There was a period where we went through that was really, that part of our intimacy was certainly absent. There was a few months there where we were doing therapy over it. For me, it was the fact that she still had very realistic looking, sores or scars, such that it felt to me like, it felt like I was looking at someone who was still injured.
So I really appreciate the honesty that everyone speaks about in those clips. I think it hopefully was able to kind of highlight maybe some things you're going through. And I think a lot of what they talk about is how our sexuality is so affected by cancer. And some of the key ones people talked about is that how it lowers a person's self-confidence and self-worth, which is so important for our sense of sexuality. A lot of people talked about not feeling sexual anymore, or not feeling desirable, not feeling attractive. And, even being afraid of intimacy. Danny at the very end as a partner talked about almost being afraid to be intimate with his wife again because he saw her as still, that he might injure her, that she was already still wounded. And then Shannon so openly talked about the physical changes that might reduce pleasure or ability to even experience passion, which are really significant. And I thought also when Shannon spoke earlier, she said, sex is physical, but it is also so mental at the same time. I just want to listen to another clip here.
I was devastated when he wasn't ready to jump back into, any kind of sex or that sort of intimacy.
It's hard to sit down and have those conversations where, I really don't enjoy you touching my breasts anymore because I don't enjoy that very much because I don't have any sensation there. And then it comes to the next time that you have sex, and then you're in the moment, and then you're like, oh, we should have had that conversation.
That comfort, that sort of passion, for me, I think I lost it.
So I think I'm wanting to just highlight that it takes a while to find your way back. And I think the biggest part is first recognizing, all the ways that maybe your sexuality and your physical sense of self have changed because of cancer. And also for partners to see how the cancer has changed even your ability to be intimate with your partner who's had cancer. And it's for the person who has cancer, I think it's a lot about we have to take the time to slowly become more comfortable again in your own skin. And that takes a lot of time and patience with yourself and your partner. And that also recognize that how you see yourself physically plays a huge part in your sexuality and your sense of intimacy. And then, like I talked about earlier, you really need to give yourself time to grieve what's been lost or what's changed about your body, about yourself through this experience. So I would just for a moment want to just speak just briefly about when an intimate relationship ends, either during treatment or after treatment, because I think this can be really difficult in moving forward in intimate relationships after cancer. So I just wanted to show a couple clips.
When my husband left me, I thought, well, of course he did. I mean, you have those moments, of course he did. Why would he want to be with someone like me?
Right at the end of treatment, when I was finished treatment, and maybe on his end, thinking, okay, now she's gotten through treatment, so she'll be okay, so now I can leave, and that's what happened. but yeah, I don't know if there was timing that could have been any better or worse. It felt, I was devastated actually, because I had been hoping for, once I got through the treatment, to sort of start picking up the pieces maybe of our relationship, but that that wasn't where he was at, and so then it was another sort of loss to grieve among all the other ones with having cancer.
So I think both, when you first listened to Brandy speak, she just talked about, I think it's really hard when you've gone through someone leaving you during cancer or right after treatment to not want to turn against yourself and think that it's because something, because you don't have the worth anymore to be in a relationship. Like, who would want to be with someone who's had cancer or has cancer? And so I think she really spoke about how much, how it affects that sense of self-worth in yourself. And I think Susie also just spoke about just how much of another loss that is in the midst of so many losses you're having to go through. And I thought that, just recognizing what it requires to kind of move through that kind of a betrayal when you're in one of the most vulnerable times probably in your life. And I just want to show another clip of Susie speaking again about what this was like for her.
Being in an intimate relationship is already a challenge, and there's so many ups and downs and a lot of work to do around keeping it together and whatever. And the place that we were, it was challenging. But then me having cancer, I think really just, in our case, kind of pushed the relationship over the cliff. And like I say, it's hard to know if I hadn't gotten cancer, if we would be together or not. But yeah, I'm thinking, I couldn't have done anything differently, even though I look back and think, oh yeah, why didn't I say this or that or do this or that? But like I was saying, I don't think I had it in me to do anything other than what I was doing.
I really like what she says there, and I think this is important for the healing process if you have been through an end of a relationship, either during or right after treatment ends, is that it's really important to not blame yourself for the relationship ending and to really practice compassion and kindness towards yourself. And like Susie was doing there, is the ability to look back and realize that really you're doing the best you could, and you just need to give yourself a lot of time to grieve the loss of that relationship and all the feelings it brings up, and to know you really need a lot of good support around you to get through that. So I just want to move now to speaking a little bit about dating after cancer. For those of you who are on your own, how do you bring someone new into your life after or during cancer in your world? I thought this was an interesting quote. I would love to have the emotional freedom and personal strength to be entirely open and honest with everyone I meet. But the truth is I don't always have it in me. I find it really challenging to accept that because I strive to be authentic and honest in my interactions with others, it can be hard to remember that I'm not obligated to share everything about my experience, and whatever I choose to share in a given moment is okay. And I really like this quote by Becky because I think it speaks a lot of the biggest thing I hear a lot of people who are thinking about dating or start dating is, when do I tell someone I had cancer or I have cancer? How much do I tell them? And I think these are really tricky, and I think it's very individual. But I think what she's saying is wanting to give herself permission that she doesn't have to feel she has to share everything. And I think that's about taking care of yourself, and it doesn't mean you're not being authentic. I think it's just knowing that it's a big thing to share, and it takes a lot of time and understanding in yourself first. And I think I'm going to show a little clip of Susie speaking about this.
Another guy that I met and went out with a couple times was more awkward, I would say, because I ended up having to talk a bit about that I have had cancer, without going into tons of detail, but we ended up being intimate, and the changes that have happened in my body since treatment and being in menopause and so on, that I had to sort of explain that, and it was extremely awkward actually. so I think and then that didn't end up going anywhere, not because he was a terrible person, but just it wasn't going to happen. But I think that also, so for myself, I think I was trying too hard to just be as I was before, and not honor that I needed to maybe just either go a bit more slowly with this guy, or I think I really was trying to just skip over everything that that was different and just be as though it was not an issue, like whatever the changes that have happened and so on.
I just want to listen to this other quote from Susie, and I think that this quote that we just listened to of her speaking is, I think, a really insightful one, around her saying that she had to realize that it does take a while in herself to understand, you know, all the changes that have happened, and then knowing how do you then bring those to meeting someone new.
Who is going to be up for dating someone who has had cancer and has had changes because of that, like physically and emotionally and so on, but then also for me, because of the kind of cancer I have and it's uncertain when it may come back, that I'm living with that uncertainty, and that then I'm having to invite someone into also having that uncertainty and being okay with living with that.
So I think that, again, that's another, you know, really helpful thing that Susie touches on, is especially if you are living with cancer and living with the uncertainty, and even those of you who are in the after, you know, hoping that cancer is not going to come back, there's still always this fear and this uncertainty. And I think it is a lot to figure out, how do I get to know how to live with uncertainty? Because that takes a lot of practice. And then the next step is, how do I bring somebody else and trust that somebody else could also live with that kind of uncertainty? So it first starts with you coming to terms with how to live with that uncertainty, and then trusting that it is possible that someone new would be interested to learn how to do that with you. And so I think overall it helps to remember that it does take time to accept all the ways you've been changed by cancer, and then be ready to let someone new into that kind of vulnerability. Remember that it takes time to get comfortable in yourself with all the changes, and it takes time to learn how to live with uncertainty, and then how to bring someone into that with you. And I also hope you can remember that you get to decide when you're ready to start dating. That's really your decision, and no one else can decide that for you. And maybe if you are starting to enter into dating, is to ask yourself each time you're with someone new, do I feel safe right now in allowing myself to be vulnerable with this person? Do I feel safe to open up and share some of my story, which is very vulnerable, with this particular person? It's helpful to ask that. So just looking at a path forward. So how do we come out of isolation and keep opening up to others rather than feeling we have to keep closing in? So this is, again, for those of you who are on your own, and also for couples. Someone here saying, what I've learned is that through bringing cancer to the forefront in my relationships, I've begun to not only empower myself, but my story is empowering to the people I connect with as well. Sharing my journey does make me somewhat vulnerable, but it is honest, and by opening myself up to others, I have gotten the opportunity to allow so many wonderful relationships and connections into my life that I may never have experienced otherwise. This is another quote. Another thing I learned, and I'm still working on, is being vulnerable. If you're not feeling 100%, let others know. There isn't any shame in letting others know. Don't be afraid to let people know. It's surprising how much that can help you deal with situations. So I think just both of those as a path forward, I think the simplest thing I'm trying to say is, you know, I think the more we get to know what's going on for us, and we start to open that and share it with others, share it with people we're being intimate with, that we can start to feel our relationships flourish, and actually new paths opening up for us. And just to close, I want to speak a little bit for those of you in long-term relationships, for couples, what it takes to move forward. So I just want to share a little bit as we close. So this is a great quote from this woman, Amy. What I learned is that when I risked opening up to him, my husband, willing to share my story, that's when the healing started. The burden of shouldering the hard feelings was shared, tensions began to reduce, and our emotional bond was further strengthened. So I think, again, that what she's saying, and I think for everybody, is the more we can open up and share our feelings, share what's changed, share our worries with those that we care about the most, that actually the healing starts to happen. And for couples, I think one of the key things is how to bring the balance back into the relationship. So the first thing is just to really remember that it takes time to adjust to the changing dynamic of your relationship, especially if you were always equal partners. So it takes time to find your way back to that place. And if possible, try to create a sense of normal, everyday routines together that can allow both of you to feel useful as well as cared for. And there are small ways you can do that to help bring some more of that equal partnership back. And just some simple tips to help you move forward as a couple. To remember to take it slowly and really be patient with each other. Just remember that you're both processing a lot right now, individually and also as you move forward as a couple. Keep talking. Really keep talking as much as you can, as openly and as honestly as possible. And as much as you can, try to really acknowledge for each other the difficult feelings you're going through, which even though they are different from one another. And if you can, try to create some time for each other to reconnect, maybe doing things that you remembered loving doing before cancer or when you were in the early days of your relationship. And see if you can really try to find ways to have conversations that are cancer-free. And sometimes it really helps to focus on all the positive ways you've been able to cope as a couple. I think we're really good at noticing all the ways we don't think we're doing things well, but maybe actually practice every day trying to focus on some of the positive ways you've actually been able to get through this together. And I think finally it's always useful to get support from family, from friends, and maybe even consider talking to a professional, a counselor, a psychologist. I think the more people you have supporting you, the better. I think it takes a lot to try to process feelings and talk about things openly on your own. So that's when it's really useful to get support. Thank you so much for listening to this talk. And here are some of the references that came from this particular presentation. And again, the link to the documentary film from Alexander Van, it's called Cancer Talk Dirty to Me, will be available as well if you're interested to watch that show. And you're always able to reach me through Callanish Society, which is callanish.org. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for presenting on this important topic today, and thank you everyone at home for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this webcast as much as I did. If someone you know is interested in watching this webcast, please direct them to CancerConnection.ca to view our complete on-demand library. If you're not already a member of our online community, I invite you to join us at CancerConnection.ca. Our community is a great place to connect with others, discuss your personal journey, and other topics of interest. Please take a moment to fill out our survey by clicking on the clipboard icon at the bottom of your screen. Your feedback is very important, and it assists us with the development of future webcasts. Stay tuned to CancerConnection.ca for information about our upcoming webcasts, and we hope you'll join us again soon.